Hey everybody, welcome to Learn from People Who Lived It. I'm Matthew Blades, and a reminder that our podcast is totally free and ad-free. So if you don't mind, give us a nice little review and most importantly, share it with a friend. Now, today's episode, I would love for you to share if you know somebody who has experienced suicide. Coming up September 8th through the 14th, it's National Suicide Prevention Week, and today's guest has unfortunately experienced suicide twice over. First with her husband, and then 3 years later, her son. Here's Carey telling us a little bit about him.
Here's what I found out after he passed. I found out from all of his friends and his colleagues that he had been a source of encouragement and inspiration for them. That he had helped them all through some pretty dark times. And I was not aware of that. I think that I'm very aware of what Cole's purpose was while he was here. And I'm happy that he helped so many people. He was just a very calming spirit in the room.
It's going to be a really incredible, intimate discussion today, and I'm so happy you're along for the ride. Now, Carey and I are going to be joined by my good friend, Dr. Jill McMahon, who's written a new book called Bulletproof. And as a matter of fact, we're going to sit down and spend some time with Jill after this podcast is done to talk about her new book, which is coming out tomorrow. So I'm glad you're here. Please put on your listening ears and pull out all of the goodness that is Carey's story, because at the end of the day, what you're going to discover is that it comes down to one word when we all go through really difficult things, and that word is purpose. She uses the word vision, but this is a good one, man. Let's jump in.
Looking for no bullshit conversation about mental health? Find Learn from People Who Lived It wherever you get podcasts. Search it using all one word. Learn from People Who Lived It.
Welcome to another episode of Learn from People Who Lived It.
I'm Carey Conley, and currently I live in Scottsdale, Arizona, originally from Denver, Colorado, but I moved here a little over 7 years ago.
Awesome. Carey, what story are you here to share today?
Kind of the journey of where I got to be known as a vision expert, especially in the field of mental health. And fast forward now, I've taught my exercises to thousands of people, mostly in the entrepreneurial space. But in the past 10 years, I've lost both my husband and my 25-year-old son 3 years apart to suicide. And so it became very apparent to me when that happened, the whole 20 years that I've been teaching vision to other people, thinking that it was just to help entrepreneurs change their hobbies into money-making businesses, became a whole different mission. And so now I'm using that platform to offer hope to people. I have a podcast and I speak and I have a couple of books, but I'm super focused on young adults right now because they are really, really struggling. So that's what I'm using my voice for now. And I'm very public with my story because I want to offer them hope and to help them find their vision.
So I think that answers the question, who do we hope hears this today? Welcome to our podcast called Learn from People Who Lived It. And today we have an opportunity to do just that. Carey's not here by herself today. She's joined by one of my good friends, grief counselor, all-around badass. Her name is Jill McMahon. She is just an incredible human being and has really worked a lot in this space of grief, especially as it relates to suicide, which is why I thought she would be an excellent addition to our episode today. On top of that, I want to encourage everybody to keep listening to this podcast after it is done, because Jill and I are going to talk about her brand new book that will be out tomorrow. As a matter of fact, at the time of this release, Jill, tomorrow is the release of the book, correct?
Correct, sir.
Okay.
September 3rd.
This is going to be a big one. So anyways, hang out for all of that stuff. Carey, back to you. We love to start on this podcast with the first 10 years of people's lives. It gives us an idea of like, who are you? How did you grow up and what are you all about? And so will you help us understand your childhood a little bit?
Oh, geez. I wasn't expecting that question. Okay. So again, I'm from Denver, Colorado. And I grew up in a household with two parents. That were both working full time. I have a younger brother who's 3 years younger than me. It's definitely one of those latchkey kids, right? That would come home from school, take care of my brother, get dinner started, until my parents got home. I was very much a creative child, and I really wanted to be a singer growing up. So I would spend a lot of my time in my bedroom with my record albums, singing mostly to the Carpenters, Partridge Family, Jackson 5. This is definitely dating me, right? Into anything I could make into a microphone, a pen, my brush, whatever.
I love that.
Yeah, that was my vision. I thought I was going to be an entertainer, a singer, and a dancer, and an actress growing up.
That's so cool. I used to do the same thing down in my basement. I would spin records and pretend to be a radio DJ. And lo and behold, I ended up doing that gig for a few minutes.
Yeah, good for you.
Yeah. What about you, Jill? What were you using as microphones? Were you singing as a little girl? What was your story?
Oh, I was with Carey. And Carey, I am also a Colorado girl. So conversation for another day. I mean, I was anything I could make into a microphone. I've never been afraid of a microphone, honestly. So I don't know if that's good, bad, or otherwise, but I really thought I was going to be a librarian, Mathew. I know you're surprised by that.
That is actually very interesting to know about you.
Mm-hmm.
Carey, I have a question, and I want to march us closer to, the big events in your life, because again, we're here to learn from you. And so can you talk to me about how you come to know Ross? That's your late husband. How did you guys meet?
We met in high school. It was my junior year and his senior year. We were hanging around with a lot of the same people. And then I invited him to a Sadie's Hawkins dance. Do you all know what?
For people that don't know what that is, explain it.
It's where the girl asks the guy, right?
There it is.
Again, this was the 70s, so that was not,
it was still happening. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So that was our first date, and we started dating seriously from there. So we dated for 5 years all through college, and then got married right out of college and moved back to Colorado.
When did you guys have kids?
We had my son when I was 29. So we'd been married for 7 years. And then 2 years later, we had my daughter.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, you mentioned up front that, you were all about purpose. You were doing these workshops, and then you had these two terrible tragedies unfold in your life. And as we start to march down this road of talking about suicide, I want to warn people there's probably some things that are going to come up that could trigger, some things in you. And so we'll do our best to tread lightly and carefully in this space. But I'm going to come to you, Jill, right away as we start to dive down this road of suicide. One of the things that I want to get clear on is a couple of the myths that are out there that are really unhealthy. I want to talk about the language that we're using around suicide now, which I think is improving. So let's start there. We're not saying committed suicide anymore. Now we're saying died by suicide. Jill, help us understand why that little subtle difference is so important.
So there's been a movement, Mathew, and I'm really glad that you brought that up at the top of the hour. And I see Carey is nodding her head as well. There's been a movement to move away from the word commit for a minimum of 10 years. It really started catching on about 5 years ago, maybe even less. But for family members that have lost someone to suicide, when you use the term commit, it implies that their loved one committed a crime, did something unlawful, did something shameful. And so the more that general society is learning about suicide itself, I hope that we're becoming more aware that it's not a sin. It hasn't, you guys, I mean, in reality, and this is a whole different show, but it has not been considered a sin in the Catholic Church for decades, that an old stigma exists, right? And stories don't die until the last person that tells the story dies. So we have a long way to go, but we've definitely made some shifts and improvements when it comes to talking about suicide in our culture.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So are there myths that are out there that are pretty unhealthy aside from the language we're using, Jill?
That individual was selfish. Conversation again that I think Carey and I can probably have. separately on the side is, and Carey, I don't know about you, but I've worked with survivors of suicide, so friends and family members that have been left behind after suicide has occurred for over 20 years. I've been impacted by suicide in my own life, and I can tell you, I learned pretty quickly that suicide itself is actually selfless. So I want everybody just to sit with that concept for a second, because how often, Carey, and I'm wondering, after you lost your husband, or especially after you lost your husband, did you ever hear from people in your circle, he was so selfish. I can't believe he did this to you guys. And how did that make you feel? Honestly, what was that like?
Yeah. I don't know if anybody except for maybe one or two actually said those exact words, Jill, that was so selfish, but it definitely was implied, because I remember sitting with a very good friend of mine, a mentor of mine, at lunch, and it wasn't too long after Ross had passed that she said to me, "What would you say to him right now if he was sitting in that chair right now?" And I could tell she was angry with him. Right. So that is an implied thing, thinking that he did something to me, that this was, she was just angry that he would choose to do this to us.
Yeah.
And I said to her, I would just hope to know, I would just want to know how he was feeling and how I could have helped him. I feel no anger towards him, because like you just said, Jill, I truly know, same with my son, that they both really felt like we would be better off without them. Right. And it's interesting that you say that it's selfless. I have my own podcast, and I recorded a solo episode that will drop in September because it's Suicide Prevention Month. And I said that exact phrase. Yeah.
And I'll be curious to see what response you get to that.
Yes.
To that comment in September, because oftentimes when I say that to somebody, and remember, I'm well aware of the circle the three of us are in right now, we're like-minded people, but there may be others that hear this and that catches their breath for a second. They're taken aback for a second when you hear the term selfless when it comes to suicide. And I think, Carey, and I know you'll relate to this, in my work of sitting with probably hundreds, if not thousands, of families after they've lost someone to suicide and listening to their stories, I really quickly came to realize that taking your life, believe it or not, it's not healthy coping,
right?
But it's a courageous act. You have to be incredibly brave. Not to dig too deep. I know Mathew started with trigger warnings today, but you do have to be incredibly brave to finish that final act. And you just nailed it, Carey. I mean, from every diary entry that I've read, there really is this true belief that my family would be better off if I was out of the equation. I only complicate their lives. I want them to have relief from whatever problem I've created, right? And of course, as survivors, that is absolutely false. Nothing could be more false than that. We would go to the ends of the earth to, no problem would ever be too big to want you to die. But that's somebody who's healthy.
Yes.
Trying to think like somebody whose brain is unhealthy.
Right.
Yeah.
Did you guys fight a long battle with his mental health, or was it a quiet battle? Can you, and we don't need details here, because I don't know that serves any real great purpose, but was it a long battle? Was it something he kept to himself and then you were surprised one day, or how did that come to be?
This is always the big question everybody asks is, were there signs? Did you see it coming? And so this is my answer. I wish I could give people a bulleted point thing of checklist.
Yes.
Look for this, So here's my answer. So I knew that my husband was really struggling, most especially struggling with his job, which for most men, a lot of what shakes them is their identity wrapped up in their position, their career. My husband had been very, very successful in corporate sales for the same company for 30 years. And the company was getting ready to go through a merger. And it had been a long coming, like almost a year. And he was really, really struggling with what might happen to him with the merger. It's just, there was a lot wrapped into it. And so I know that he was really concerned about that and concerned about our lifestyle. And I think in hindsight, Mathew, there was a lot more going on than just that. I think it was years of things that he had hidden from me as to how he felt about himself. And so it really started escalating, I would say maybe a month before he actually passed.
Wow. Okay.
And I feel our son had right at that point, had graduated from college and had taken a 5-week trip to Asia. And we were just worried sick about him the entire time he was gone. And I think that just really, during that time was when I think he made the decision that, you know what, I'm not going to get any better. The pain is huge and I don't know how I'm going to deal with this. So I think in hindsight, and the more I've learned about this, there was a lot going on and that he had hidden from me for years, but I did not see it until the very end. Now, did I ever think for a second that he was going to take his life? Not in a million years. It was a total surprise to everything. My husband was extremely outgoing, very well liked, very well respected. I just never crossed my mind.
Jill, can I ask you, in all your years of working with survivors of suicide, is it common that most people don't see it coming until that fateful day that it happens? Or is it more common for people to say, I'm going to kill myself, or, get into some of that language where they start to maybe threaten that or around their inner circle as a means to really let people know how they're feeling?
It's definitely more common. Carrie's experience is definitely more common.
It is.
Kind of just being broadsided, right? And so I have worked with families who had a loved one who maybe, let's just say, was hospitalized a couple times, or maybe had a couple suicide attempts in the past. But I will tell you that on the day or the week or the month that their loved one died by suicide, they still didn't see it coming, right? Because there's this facade. And I love, like, Carey, I can like sense your intuitiveness and your, yeah, I knew he was struggling, but right, he was wearing a mask. He let you see as much as he was allowing you to see. And that's the thing that I think is really important for other survivors, especially those that are newly bereaved, to understand when they start to feel that guilt and they start to feel the, how did I fail them? What didn't I see? What could I have done differently? Well, they allow you to see as much as they want you to see.
Right.
And that ultimately is up to your person. It's not up to you. So yeah, Mathew, to answer your question, I can work with families that have had somebody who's been suicidal in the past and they're still shocked, or I can work with families that literally it came out of broad daylight and they had no idea. I have a client whose husband was a physicist. He was a professor at a local university. Never saw it coming until the night he took his life.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a few things that I want to discuss, but then I really want to get to purpose. I don't want to spend our entire podcast talking about, all of this stuff. But when it comes, and Jill, maybe this is for you, but when it comes to things like suicide, and I would imagine there's stages of it, right? Like, it just is, you don't wake up one day and be like, I'm going to end it all. I would imagine that it's a gradual climb. And so can you offer us some expertise on that? Like, how does it usually ramp up for folks?
Two things. I am going to give you my opinion on that. And then, Carey, I'm just warning you, girl, because I'm going to pitch this to you. Because in my opinion, you are as much of an expert as I am, if not even more, to tell you the truth. And I'm really honest about that. I think survivors are the experts. But what I will say when I go out and train community members is that it's never just the one thing that you recognize, right? So, Carey, I'm just going to use your story as an example because you've shared it with our listeners. And that's that, Ross was going through some transition in his career with his job. So it would be really easy to identify that as the cause. right? And for some, it can be, we had a fight the night before, and so I'm going to say that's the cause. Or, you know, he was in financial distress, that was the cause. Or he got a horrible diagnosis, that was the cause. But I will tell you, in my experience, suicide, there is never one cause. It is always 100 things. I always say that. So what you recognize at the end as the cause is really just one out of 100. You need to go back and try to figure out, you don't need to, but you will usually in time, the other 99 reveal themselves. And it could be a note that you find or a file that you find in the computer from 2013. You know, that this isn't the first time that they've had thoughts of just giving in or, yeah. Carey, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's been 10 years now since my husband passed. So I've had a lot of time to really reflect on this, right? And like I said earlier, I believe that there were so many layers going on from my husband's childhood, from the messages he was given, the fact that he chose to go into corporate sales when I think really I wished that my husband had been a teacher. He loved it. He taught Bible study to the second graders in our church, and he absolutely loved that. And I begged him at the end. I said, I don't care if you go drive a bus. I just want you to be happy, right? Yeah. I think there were a lot of things. He lost his parents back to back and his older brother. And I think there was a lot of pain there and a lot of guilt around that. I think there was a lot, as well as some disruptions in our marriage. So when people come to me, Jill, and they say, okay, so what do you think it was? Do you think they were just mentally ill, right? I'm like, it's not just one thing. I can't give you that answer. It's a lot of things. Yeah, so my husband hid a lot of it very, very well.
And how many common threads are there between his and your son's episode? Are there a lot of similarities? Are they totally different scenarios? Or, I mean, how does that play out for you?
So my son also was struggling with the decision of a job that he had taken here in Arizona. He'd been working there for 3 years and he was not happy, and it was not a place he should have been. It was a great job from a standpoint of title and exposure, but mentally it was not the best place for him to be. And I think in hindsight, there was other places that my son really wanted to be creatively, but really hid that a lot from my husband and I growing up, because I think he, in his mind's eye, probably thought his dad would not support it. And always, wanting to make his dad proud, like most little boys do, right? So towards the end of his life, he was really struggling with that as well. And unlike my husband, who had prepared for his death, I mean, he had everything in line, right? My son was supposed to go into work and let his boss know that day that he was going to quit. And we had talked about it for weeks, about how he was going to prepare for that and what he was going to do financially until we got it figured out. But instead of going into work, he panicked. He panicked and went to his condo and ended his life. So very different scenarios.
Where I want to move to next is the fact that it's you now and your daughter. Mm-hmm. And so you guys collectively, I think, decide that you're going to keep looking up. And as a matter of fact, that's the name of the book. And it's right over Jill's face right now if you're looking at us on the screen. Thank you, Jill. This is a really good use of energy. And it's one of the things that I want to kind of march us a little closer to, which is back to what you said, purpose. It's in these moments, and I have witnessed a few very close deaths in my own life, and I have seen in some cases where it blows everything up, and nobody is ever the same again, and not in a good way. Right. And I have also seen where people go, "Holy smokes, life is short. Double down. It's time to get going. It's time to really step into this stuff we're talking about." And it sounds like you and your daughter chose B, do you remember coming to her and saying, like, hey, hon, I think we should write a book together? Or did she come to you and say, hey, mom, like, we should do something with all of this?
Well, going back again to my journey, I was already a speaker before all this happened. And people knew that my platform was having a vision, why you need to have it, how to write it, all the reasons it helps you in your life. And so my daughter and I, after losing my son, we were working together in a different arena, and then decided, we had so many people asking us so many questions, and we felt like it was time to answer those questions in the book. So the book it tells a little bit about our story, but it's 11 chapters of what has helped us through the journey, because so many people were saying, how do I get through this? But most specifically, we were getting a lot of people reaching out saying, I've got somebody who's really struggling right now and I don't know how to help them. So it's 11 chapters of the things that we've learned in the journey, and it's what helped us get through it. And when the book launched, she and I started speaking together until she decided to start having babies. So now I pretty much, sometimes she comes on the podcast with me, but we haven't been on a stage together in a while. But it was very clear that the whole reason that I have been, like I said, preparing 20 years of being a vision expert, what I was being prepared for. And, that's just my faith. It's just knowing God the way I do. And, you can either shut down and not talk about it, but I think it's healing to use your pain for a purpose. And I haven't done it alone. I've had a lot of people help me through this journey.
Well, and you get to do the one thing that Jill and I have talked about several times. When somebody dies, there's this tendency to stop saying their name, and there's this tendency to stop talking about them. And then it just happens over time. People stop asking about them. And so you lose all these opportunities to talk about somebody who freaking should still be here.
Yeah.
And so that's why I think it is so valuable. You get to say Cole's name, and you get to tell stories about Cole, and you get to say Russ's name, and you get to tell stories about Russ. And that's something I'd love for you to be able to do right now, if you're open to it. Is there an amazing Cole moment for you, a story that you love to share about who this young man was?
Okay, so you promised me we weren't going to cry on this podcast.
Oh, I'm sorry. Is that going to take you there? I didn't. I just think I want to give you an opportunity to talk about him.
So, I don't know that there's one moment that I can tell you about, but I will tell you that I was very close.
Just take your time.
Yeah. Here's what I found out after he passed. I found out from all of his friends and his colleagues that he had been a source of encouragement and inspiration for them, that he had helped them all through some pretty dark times. And I was not aware of that. I think that I'm very aware of what Cole's purpose was while he was here. And I'm happy that he helped so many people. He was just a very calming spirit in the room. His dad was very outgoing, very talkative. My son was a little bit more great listener, and just could make light of situations. He just really was a peaceful spirit.
I love that. What a cool way to remember him and to honor him, because I think, if I'm not mistaken, you have probably taken bits and pieces of that and, tried to make sure that you've instilled those in your own self and
Right.
maybe your daughter as well.
Yeah.
So Jill, any questions from you? Because then now I really I want to turn the corner, and I want to really talk about, now that this thing has happened, now it's time to double down on purpose. Now it's time to get super clear about who we are and what we're here to do. So Jill, any questions from you quickly?
2 quick comments, my friend.
Yes,
I want to
please.
thank you very, very much for mentioning Cole's name, because I was going to ask right? We were talking about him and I didn't know. To everybody who's listening, this is the first time I've met Carey. And I kind of like it that way because I get to experience her story for the first time along with you. But we hadn't said Cole's name. So that was going to be my next thing, because if we're talking about our loved ones, I want to know them.
Right.
What I've been told, Carey, and thumbs up, thumbs down if you agree or disagree with this, but what I've been told is once our loved one dies, then as Mathew said, people are afraid to say their name around us. And it's for a parent or a spouse or a sibling, your daughter, it's like, don't ignore that my brother ever existed, because my brother very much existed. Yeah. And I know you're trying to protect me, but you're really just erasing him. So thank you. I will say thank you for that question, Mathew. Thank you for sharing a little bit, Carey. I appreciate that. And something you said a minute ago really rang a bell with me. And Mathew, I think this is going to lead, right into where you're going. But I love the phrase that time doesn't heal, but making meaning does. Mm-hmm. And that's what you're doing.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm very aware that Cole is the driving force behind this. Somebody said yesterday to me that she envisions me getting on bigger stages with Cole, with me. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a part of the healing process. I'm very aware that there's a picture of him right in front of me right now.
He's here. He's the fourth one right here.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. I've had a lot of very intuitive people show up randomly into my life to bring me messages.
Love it.
Yeah, that's been very healing as well. I'm very aware where he is.
Yeah, that's the best part. I'll tell you that, recently I lost my mom. And last week I went to do some breath work, and I walked into this breath work exercise intentionally to set some grief down and just kind of work through some things. And the moment we started to breathe, and if you've ever done shamanic breath work before, there's a moment where your body starts to vibrate a little bit. You kind of start to have what we could call an out-of-body experience. And about 3 minutes into slipping into this pattern, all of a sudden, all I could see was my mom holding me like I was a little baby. Mm-hmm. Wow. And now I'm going to cry because I could feel her holding me.
Yeah.
And wanting to be close to me while I worked through this moment. And it was beautiful. It was my favorite part of the night. It was something that I'm going to remember for always. And she continues to show up for me in all of these different places, through birds, through butterflies, through a song that comes on the radio, to a sweatshirt. My mom used to say all the time, it used to drive me insane. She would say, "It is what it is." And one day I was in an elevator and I was having a shitty day. And this woman walked onto the elevator in a big ass sweatshirt that said, "It is what it is." And I was like, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for showing up, because I appreciated that. I needed that right now. And so let's jump into purpose, because I'm going to imagine you had a purpose that looked one way, and then it got a little different when you lost your husband, and then it got maybe even a little bit more different as you lose your son. So will you talk to us about the importance of being flexible with your purpose?
Okay. So remember my story that I wrote my first vision when I was 28, and I got very, very clear on what I wanted my life to look like. And mostly I wrote a lot about who I wanted to become, who I wanted to impact. So stepping into being an entrepreneur, I first stepped into the industry of network marketing and built a really big team. And every single person I brought on my team, I had them go through writing their vision for me, because I knew that if they did not have a really big, powerful vision of why they wanted to make that business work, they were going to quit. Because for so many reasons, being an entrepreneur is so hard, especially then in the late 80s in network marketing, when everybody thought, oh, don't do that.
Right.
Right. So I needed them to get really rock solid in their vision, because I knew I needed them to see beyond what it was just achieving the car and the trips and all the stuff, that it was a legacy they were leaving, and their purpose was hidden in that. And so through that journey, like I said earlier, I ended up coaching a lot of entrepreneurs, because I knew they didn't have a really clear vision. And so they were drifting and running, like I said, really expensive hobbies, and they weren't connecting it to anything bigger than them. And so now when I talk about all the reasons you need to have a written vision, which some of those things are already there, I talk about the biggest reason of all is that it's your anchor through all of your adversities. Because the only reason I keep doing what I'm doing, you guys, is that I know what I'm doing now is bigger than how I'm feeling every day.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah.
Say that again. Say that exact sentence again.
Yeah. I said this last night at an event that I was speaking at, and mostly entrepreneurs. I said, the reason you are drifting and inconsistent and don't pick up momentum with what you're doing is because you're allowing how you're feeling to rule your day and your activity. And I always had a bigger vision. There were so many days I wanted to quit my network marketing business, you guys, so many days. And the reason I didn't was because the vision I had for where I was going and why I was doing it was bigger than how I felt that day. Mm-hmm. Right.
Jill, double down on that, please. I can see you stewing. Go for it.
Wow. I mean, what else is that there to say? That's our tagline. That was amazing, right? Your anchor is way bigger than how you're feeling in each moment at each day. Because I mean, Carey knows first and foremost, not only in your professional career, but also in your personal career. I mean, your personal life, excuse me, that if we let emotions rule our decisions, in a world that already after trauma, and my dear, you've not been traumatized once, you've been traumatized twice, and I only know about this much of your life. So I know, I don't know anything about the first 29 years of your life. And so there could be layers of trauma. However, we can get really lost in that. We can really, and I'm sure you had this conversation with your entrepreneurs last night, like we can get lost in the narrative that we have created about what life has served us.
Right.
Man, it has served me dirty.
Yeah.
And, why am I even trying?
Yeah.
What is this all about? What is this all worth? I obviously screw everything up anyway. Or life fails me, or, all of the A, B's, and C's. Let's go down the list of ways in which people hijack their thinking.
Yes.
So maybe a good question to ask you, Carey, is like, how do you coach people? How do you help people get out of those phases? Because let's be honest with each other. It's important to feel the feelings. It's important to cycle through them and acknowledge that, okay, I'm angry in this moment, or I'm sad in this moment, or, I have regret in this moment, or whatever that looks like for you. But then it's equally, if not more important, that you then cycle out of the emotion and then move back into, what a guy like Ben Newman calls your standard, just kind of like, how are you going to operate every single day? Yeah. So how do you coach folks who want to be stuck in a story to get out of it?
Well, number one, I have to get them to give me a vision that is bigger than the story so that they'll work with it, because I had all of that. So when I joined my network marketing company, the woman who sponsored me into the company was my best friend from high school, who died unexpectedly 6 months later, and not by suicide. It was an aneurysm. And so there was that. And then there was all the rejection that I had, and all of my husband hating me doing network marketing, begged me to stop, and then we had our kids, all the things, right? There were all the things. It's just life. And when I start coaching somebody, the very first thing they have to do for me is they have to write a vision with me that's bigger than it. They have to want it like air to breathe. Right. Mm-hmm. And so when they hit the walls, and I've now just named some of the walls, right? I talk to them about, okay, what's bigger? Is the wall going to stop you, or do you want this bad enough to push through it? So that's the first thing. Second thing is I have to talk to them about fear. That's always a big question I get is, okay, how do you get over all the fears? And I tell them two things. Number one, you don't. Just understand that if you are growing something that you've never grown before, or going through some personal growth, there's always going to be fear. If you don't have any fear, you're in a comfort zone and it's not serving you. So there's always the fear. And I've learned that the bigger the thing I'm going after, the more fear will show up. And that means that I'm doing something right.
Boy, lean into that a little bit. Not easy at first. That's a scary place to go for so many folks, especially if they've been stuck in grief for a while, right? Where they haven't mobilized very much. So
Yeah.
what a great thing for you to say, okay, so we're creating a vision that's bigger than our story. We're going toe to toe with our fear, and we're going to face it head on. Is there another element, another layer to this?
I think the biggest layer is that they have to get around people that support them and believe in them.
Amen.
Yeah. Going into Arbonne was the company, by the way, in network marketing. A lot of people know the company. I was surrounded by amazing women that were a little bit further ahead in the game, had already gone through the personal growth I was going through, or, at the levels that I wanted to be at. And they saw me at my highest potential. And on the days I wanted to quit, they were the ones who went, no, you're not. You're not doing it, because we need you. We see you here. Take the day off if you need to, but keep going. So you need those people that believe in you, especially if you've got people in your world, again, that I told you earlier, were really questioning why I would leave my corporate job and go sell lipstick.
Yeah. It's crazy. And what I'm thinking about right now, and then Jill, I want your comments on this. I saw this unbelievable video on social media the other day, and it was this pastor. And he had brought a man up on the stage who was really struggling with some things. And it then says to this man, do you have 5 people here at church that you know? And he said, yes, I do. And he said, who are they? And so he brought him up. And so what the pastor did was he put these 5 guys around this guy in the middle, and he had them all join hands. And he was trying. And then, this is the point that he was trying to make with him. He said, so when you're looking to improve your situation, if you're looking to get out of one place and into a new, and these are the people that you're going to surround yourself with, when you want to move, they have to move with you. Because if they don't move with you, they actually become your cage. And it was such a beautiful illustration of like how, for so many of us, the people that we say, I love you to, our friends, our family, coworkers, people that are really close to us, we consider them like our circle of friends, but they become the cage that doesn't let us grow and doesn't give us the opportunity to move outside of ourselves. And so, Jill, I want you to just sort of double down on that and tell me what that makes you think about as it relates to healing from something like this and stepping into your purpose.
So people can feel threatened by our growth.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right? People can feel. So if you are fortunate enough, and I'm going to say fortunate enough, if you are fortunate enough to be in a growth mindset, and not everybody is, at least not right away. Carey, I don't know when that kind of struck for you, but it could have been a couple months. It could have been a couple years after losing your son, subsequently after losing your husband. So whatever your time frame is, once you feel that growth mindset, you have to find other people in your world that will share that growth and that feeling. And that feels a little weird, right? Because your friend group has stood by you this whole time. They've been loyal to you and they've been great, but they also know what sad, hurting, desperate, and fragile Carey is like. They know that Carey, and they know that Carey really well, and they know how to care for that Carey really, really well. Well, when Carey starts to gain a little strength in her legs and get a little stronger, and she wants to lead the way all of a sudden, not by any ill intention, but your immediate group, I'm creating a fictitious story, everybody, but your immediate group doesn't know what to do with you.
Yeah.
That makes them uncomfortable because they don't know how to respond to that, Carey.
Yeah.
So it's really about them, and it's not about you. So it's using the anchor that Carey has just so beautifully described. So everybody who's listening to this, if you've experienced grief and loss, or if you have not, I think all 3 of us are going to implore you today to sit down and write a list and figure out what your anchor is. And if you just tuck it away, you tuck it away, because you never know when that day is going to be. You never know if tomorrow your beloved aunt is going to get hit by a car, and that you're going to need that lister to be reminded of what your anchor is, right?
Mhm.
So I love that suggestion, Carey, but also don't be offended or hurt or let down if when you start growing, your immediate circle doesn't know what to do with you.
Yeah.
They're not trying to be hurtful. They're just uncomfortable. And
Yeah.
it's okay to step outside of their discomfort and follow your heart where it's taking you.
Yeah, I could do a whole afternoon workshop on this topic.
Yeah, we'll dive in for a few minutes. There's no, we got about 15 minutes left. I mean, dive in a little bit on this.
All right, so I'll share two things. When I do vision workshops with people, I talk about your front row. It's an exercise that I was taught years ago, and I've now repeated it to thousands of people. And out of everything I do with teaching people about their vision and how to identify their stories, move past their obstacles, the front row is the thing everybody comes back to me with. So it's an exercise where I envision them, get them to envision that they are standing on a stage and they're looking out into the theater and there's rows of seats, right? Let's say there's 5 to 10 seats in every row. Second part of the exercise is to make a list of the 5 to 10 people they spend the most amount of time with. Third part of the exercise is I get them to rank these people based on how they make them feel. It's not a judgment thing. It's how do they make you feel when you're with them? So the 9s and 10s are the people who, like I just talked about, they're the ones that believe in you, see you past where you are. They're going to remind you of your greatness. They're probably even a little bit further ahead of you in your personal, professional life. They just make you feel like you can do anything. Opposite end of the scale, the 1s and 2s are the people that just suck the life right out of you, right? Like you can be feeling like a 9 or 10 and 5 minutes with them and you're like, ugh. The only people that should be in the front row of your life are the 9s and 10s. The only people who should be there. So, and that's a limited space. So anybody that's not a 9 or 10 that you've got on the list, they need to be moved from the front row of your life, meaning not spending as much time with them and definitely not letting them speak advice into you or making you feel any different than your greatness. And a lot of times that's really challenging because some of those people you are blood related to, you're married, you've been friends since kindergarten, but even one person in that row that's lesser 9 and 10 dissipates the power of the rest, right? So there's that. I've helped people move a lot of people around, and a lot of times people tell me they don't have enough 9s or 10s in their life and they need to figure out how to bring them in.
Yes.
And do that, right? But the second thing I want to say is, and this is a chapter in the book that my daughter and I wrote, we learned, especially after losing my husband first, who were our super safe people. It's literally the chapter. The people that we knew were going to be with us for the long haul. They were going to respond to our needs based on what we needed, not what they needed. Which is what you just taught. A lot of people, what they want to do is react to you the way that they would want support. Like some people just wanted to rush to us and just sit on our couch and hold our hands and do this whole kumbaya thing. And that is so not my daughter and I, right? But that's what they needed. And we just didn't have the energy for that. So we literally like almost built a moat around our house. Like there were only certain people that are allowed in. And we lost a lot of people. Because like you said, Jill, they just flat out did not know how to deal with us. And they didn't know not only how to deal with us and to help us, but they also, it was a reflection to them of their own grief of losing either Ross or Cole. So yeah, we've lost, some family members, some of my husband's best friends, my son's best friends. It's a lot for them to handle. And we had to work through that and not be bitter about that and just give them a lot of grace and mercy, which is another chapter in the book.
Yeah. I love that you said that because I don't think it's something that I like to say to people is like certain folks have to leave. Like they just have to leave the equation and they don't have to permanently go, but man, they better get the hell out of chapter 5, 6, and 7 because there's about to be some crazy things happening in those chapters.
Yeah.
We'll see if they can come back in 8, but we don't say it enough that we often need to shed our skin like snakes do. And we need to find a new rock to huddle up underneath. And we need to find, like, I love this front row analogy because it's such an easy way for people to understand. It's like if you were a performer and you were looking out in the front row, who would you want to be there? And you know, what's amazing is you think of any artist in the world, and Taylor Swift comes to mind because why not? You know, who are the people in her front row, man? Those people, they love her unconditionally. They would do anything for her. Like, and those are the folks that we really want to have in our circle, is the people that will help us get anywhere we go. And what I'm thinking about as she's telling this story, Jill, is like, this is why after, you know, somebody dies, there's divorces, there's families that break up, there's because people get to a point where they're like, life's too short and I'm done dealing with this, and so I'm out.
Yeah.
And for a lot of people, that's probably a pretty good option, you know?
On top of everything else that we are experiencing, when we
Yeah.
are devastated with our grief, we should not have to be responsible for anybody else's reaction to our pain.
Okay.
That is the last thing. I mean, all three of us on this call, I think, understand what it feels like to be in enough pain that you're just trying to remind yourself to breathe today.
Right.
I just need, and maybe before bedtime I should eat, but I may actually not, that may not make my list today. I mean, when it's that bare bones, you are in that much what we call psych ache, emotional distress, emotional pain. I should not have to worry if Aunt Susie is pissed off that I did not call her back today.
Yeah.
And thank you to my neighbor that's dropped off 3 meals. My apology is that I haven't gotten a thank you note out to you timely. I know, I mean, Carey, I know you know what I'm saying, and that happens. And I call that the do not call list. So I tell all my grievers, you're going to figure out what your do not call list is really quickly.
Yeah.
And it's the people that are honestly demanding anything of you
Right.
during your time of grief.
Yeah.
But I love what Carey said about front row as well, Mathew. To me, that's the next chapter. Like when you're ready to stand up tall and grow and be and redefine your life, it's so great if your front row is looking at you lovingly and cheering you on and not expecting anything in return.
Exactly.
So we say it all the time, right? Your test is your testimony. That's a big one that we hear. Your pain is your, you know, your purpose. And, you know, so you wouldn't wish this on your worst enemy, having to lose a husband and a son, but it does sound like you've gained an incredible amount of insight from those experiences. And so my final question to you today is going to be about the book, which again, I'm going to put up on the right there. Keep looking up. If anybody were to pick up this book today and they had just 15 minutes to read one chapter, where are you going to send these folks because of the message that's inside those pages?
Our last chapter is the most important. It's faith. You know, my husband, my daughter and I are very aware of where my husband and my son are.
Yes.
And we are very certain that we will see them again.
Yes.
And that's the anchor. I don't know how anybody gets through any kind of loss without that. Honestly, I just don't. So it's got to be that you've got to find your faith and a connection to God, because without that, it's just too easy to look at this world, especially this world the way it is right now, and just see nothing but doom and gloom. Right? So you've got to have something where you're seeing something beyond that, and knowing that right now this is just a blip on the radar screen. This day. Right? Yeah, I know where I'm going.
Yeah. Jill, wrap some color around that.
I think she said it all, and I think she said it really well. I will just say, boring, but research actually shows that those with faith heal faster than those without. And that's really, sometimes that's tricky, especially suicide, Carey. I mean, I know that's what makes suicide different. It's the shame and the guilt and the stigma that's associated, makes it additionally more complicated than other losses. But those that have some type of faith that they can lean on, and I don't think we get to dictate what that looks like. I don't. They tend to help. They tend to heal faster than those that don't.
Yeah.
It's really true. I remember saying at my mom's funeral service, giving her eulogy. And my mom had a really, really close relationship with Jesus, and we had a very, very incredible, as I look at it from the outside in, just a really beautiful relationship. And the fact that this thing that you just said, the fact that she had that relationship made it really easy to let her go to that place.
Yeah.
Because I knew where she was headed. I knew she knew where she was headed. And this is where people, in my opinion, really mess up, because you don't have to have the same relationship with the Lord or Buddha or Muhammad or whatever your religion is, the universe. You don't have to have the same relationship that that person did. But if they have that relationship, then you can know that they knew exactly where they were headed. And there is so much peace in that.
Yeah. Well, again, that's all there is.
Yeah.
Right. So we just think too much about ourselves.
Yeah. Amen to that. Amen to
that. Especially in the speaker world. We think that we are the ones that are really making the impact. And really, it's not. Every time I get stuff on a stage or get ready to talk, I just pray that God will work through me.
Yes.
And they'll see beyond me. And there's so many great thought leaders that are making such really big impacts in the world. But the ones that I gravitate towards are the ones that are super humble, and they talk a lot about their faith. And they're really humble about their adversities that they've been through, because most people, when you see them, they've been through some tough stuff. And they're typically the kind of people that I have been bringing on my podcast as well. Pretty well-known people that have been through some humbling experiences, and they're willing to talk about it, because we need to level the playing field. Every time I talk about my husband and my son and losing them to suicide. I mentioned it last night to the group. And the reason I do is because I need them to know that I know they're all going through something too, and we're all in the same place.
Yes. Yeah, we talk about it a lot on this podcast, Carey. It's like everybody wants to have the trauma Olympics, and it's like, friends, this is not a contest. We're just all in the sport.
Right.
We're all just getting through things. And so don't worry about whose was worse or whose was better. Screw all that. It's all hard in their mind and in their world. And that's why we just got to be probably a lot more gentle with each other and understand that, man, we're all fighting something on any given day.
That's right.
I love the lessons in this podcast, Carey. Thank you so much for coming on and talking with us. And I think if I have marching orders for myself today, it's that I want to sit down and I want to make sure I'm really concrete about this vision that I have that's bigger than the story. I want to create that for myself. I want to have a vision that's bigger than the tough stuff that I've gone through. And so that's a really cool thing. And then Jill and I are going to sit down and we're going to talk about who's in our front row. We're going to figure that piece out together.
You're in my front row, buddy.
Me? You too.
Yeah.
You too. I mean, without question, that's why you're here. Carey, the book, again, for folks that want to read it, it's called Keep Looking Up. I'm guessing that's your beautiful daughter, Laurel, there on your left-hand side.
Yes.
Yeah. Fantastic.
Yeah, and I have another book that I wrote before this one called Vision is Victory. It's a workbook that I give people for free that I'll give you the link to, Mathew, so that you can share it with your audience.
Put it in our show notes. Absolutely. We'll put it in our show notes.
It's a workbook to help people understand how to write their vision. It's a very simple book.
Okay, the book's out there. That's the podcast. It's called Mental Health Breakthroughs. So you can check that out at your earliest convenience as well. And I'll just tell everybody listening, there are some people that I meet and I say, you should be on the podcast. And I say that, but I mean like down the road. And then there's people that I meet and I'm like, you should be on the podcast. And they literally show up 2 weeks later. And that was Carey. So here we go. I knew there was going to be some magic in this story. And there certainly was. Appreciate your time.
Oh, appreciate you guys. Thank you.
Thank you, Carey.
We have 3 goals with Learn from People Who Lived It. 1, to help you feel less alone. 2, encourage you to seek out a coach, a therapist, a church, anyone who can help you get through your journey and find some healing. 3, when you're ready, share your story with us.
Find Learn from People Who Lived It wherever you get podcasts. Search it using all one word. Learn from People Who Lived It.
So how about that? Carrie's conversation, pretty good, huh, Jill?
Amazing. She's
Yeah.
incredible.
All right, now let's enough about all that. I want to talk about you. You and I have known each other for quite a while now, and you have you hit the eject button. If you were the Top Gun F-16 fighter pilot, you hit the eject button on your life for about 5 months, and you went dark, and you got serious about this book called Bulletproof.
I did.
Now, for those who don't know about Jill McMahon, there's a history there and a reason that we have written, you have written this book about gun violence. And we're going to get to that story in just 1 second. But I just want to say up front, as soon as you use the word gun violence, immediately, everybody listening went to a place. Whether it was politically left or right, guns rights, not guns rights, what should we do, what shouldn't we do? But like, that's why you wrote this book, because that is the problem, that we go to politics and we forget about the people who are involved in these situations, correct?
Correct, my friend.
Okay. So, Jill, first up, why did you write this book? I know it connects back to a story in your childhood. Do you mind actually starting with that? I think that's a good place to start.
Yeah, I'll delve into that a little bit. I mean, first and foremost, I've always felt that I have a pull and I have a call to do something in this realm and community. And I never really knew how to do that effectively because of what you just stated. Anytime I felt like I wanted to help or take some action or create some change around gun violence, it very quickly became political. And that became disheartening to me because I really wasn't coming at it from a political angle. But we just live in a culture that, that has been trained to want to have to point a finger or to hear these very uncomfortable words and go, well, it must be their fault or their fault. And in the meantime, whom is getting lost is the survivors and the victims and the caretakers of people that have lived through gun violence. And so I really wrote this book for them. With that being said, I have some firsthand knowledge. Not only am I a trauma specialist, and I've done that for a very long time, but I was a gun violence victim as a child when I was 6 years old, eons and eons ago, and the whole landscape of gun violence has taken on a very different look in, the 21st century. But I am 50 something years old and I've never forgotten it. It doesn't haunt me, but it still impacts me. It has partially shaped who I am. And so it's a part of me.
So what were you doing? Were you like slinging crack on the street and somebody carjacked you? Were you hustling? Well, what was the story?
It was two, women, my mom and myself were at the mall of all places. It was like a Thursday afternoon. We were dropping my sister off at the mall and we were approached by two gentlemen in the parking lot that had a flat tire, and we were essentially carjacked. At the time that occurred, in all of the newspapers and police reports, it was considered a kidnapping because carjackings didn't exist back then. But we were essentially driven around town, or my mom with a weapon to her side and myself with a gun to my head. I was the pawn. So, we gave these two gentlemen a ride to a friend's house to help repair a flat tire. And the next thing you know, I'm a young girl that has a gun to my head and I'm being held as a pawn. And my poor mother was told that she had to drive around town to our banks and withdraw all of our money. And it took several hours, all said and done. It's so interesting. And it ended up fine for us. Nobody was hurt. I'm okay as an adult. It didn't ruin my life, but I understand kind of the mud that a gun violence survivor goes through. I understand the confusion. I understand the lack of trust, all of those things. My story ended up, I'm fortunate. And if I'm fortunate and I understand it personally, and I've been allowed to sit with hundreds of individuals who have been impacted by gun violence in some way or by trauma in some way, I figured that I really needed to wrap all of those stories together. And I really needed to create a guide about what works and how to survive this the most effectively and efficiently, and honestly, how great life really can be on the other side of it.
So what happens in moments where, I mean, first up, that's incredible story. And you're right. You're so lucky to not have this permanent damage in a situation like that. But what happens in these cases where there is gun violence and then it gets real heated politically? And, because I think the story that most people kind of think about, at least that I think about, is Sandy Hook.
Mhm.
And, it was like every one of these little babies was mowed down by this monster. And it became a debate about whether or not I can keep my guns or not. And it was like, we didn't even think about these children. It just went to this crazy debate about whether we should do it or not. And I would have to imagine, and I'm only thinking about your mom in this case, like she certainly must have been talking to her friends, and there certainly must have been people on the outside going in, kind of doing this victim blaming thing, like, well, why were you so stupid to let these people in the car with you? Or why did you do this? Or why did you do that? And I just feel like, while that is maybe a natural thing to want to do, it's so useless. Do you write about that in this book?
I do write about it. And that, again, I love that you bring that up, because that's one of the things that makes this trauma so unique. That doesn't apply to a lot of other forms of trauma or violence. And so the blame game, in the book, I comment that there's this formula after a mass shooting is seen in the media, or after, a shooting, a horrific shooting occurs. What we typically see is, where did he get it? Where were his parents? Who's to blame? Okay, so in that top three, which are all about blame, in that top three, where is there any compassion or comment or empathy towards the victim? It immediately moves, it stays with the victim for minutes, if not seconds, and then turns to, well, did this victim, what was this victim's story? Where did he get his gun? Where were the parents? Did he have a mental illness? We go to blame instantly, and we stop. We've moved on from, wow, how can we help the survivor? What can we do for them? How can we help the parents of that victim? So in the book, I interviewed a mother whose daughter was a part of a school shooting. And it was so eye-opening for me that not only has this impacted her daughter long term, right? It has reshaped the way that she looks at the world, the way that she trusts or doesn't trust the world, the fear once the night falls that she experiences that maybe her peers don't experience, her inability to handle a lot of stimulation or a lot of loud noises because the fire alarm was blaring in the school for hours and hours and hours as she was hiding. Right? So we think of, rightfully so, but we think of the student, but what about her mom?
Yeah.
The fear of, how do I help my child? It's unwritten. There really, to my knowledge, Matthew, there has not been a book written quite like this one yet, in a society where gun violence is growing monthly, annually.
What kind of solutions do you propose in the book?
Solutions for healing. Well, I've dedicated a portion of each chapter to young mental health professionals, because I was one of them as at one time, right? And I don't remember there being any courses in graduate school about loss to suicide. And I bring up suicide in this conversation because 51% of suicides are by firearm.
Wow.
Suicide survivors are now being categorized in the gun violence survivor data. So
Really?
that's just as of this year. So that's important to know, right? So in graduate school, as a mental health professional, we actually spent a fraction of the amount of time on suicide that we should. In addition to that, our gun violence episodes and epidemics have grown exponentially, or they're getting more attention, right? So they're being felt, or they're affecting the general population more than ever before. So I do dedicate a portion of each chapter to kind of best practices for the young mental health professionals, right? This is a population you're going to see, and I really feel like we're ill prepared for it. So let me give you some tools and tips that I've learned along the way. Again, I dedicate a portion for the caregiver, and I dedicate a portion of each chapter for the survivor. So, I do give some tools along the way. I don't want to give it all away because you have to read it, but it's a lot of just slowing down, learning how to retrain the voice in your head that tells you that you're a victim for life, and that this is now, the dreaded cape that you have to wear that you don't want. The brain actually physically changes after trauma. It's fascinating. So if you feel crazy after experiencing trauma, if you feel that nobody understands, especially gun violence and suicide, where you do feel really isolated and alone because your next door neighbor can't really relate. If you feel all of those things, you're right. You're not imagining it. It's not made up. If your mom or your uncle or your boss wants you to get back to normal and be your regular self and tell you to, quit sitting in your pool of pity, the brain actually changes after trauma. It's real. So I validate that. But with that being said, I go through steps and ways that you can retrain your brain. I hope you understand how your brain is processing trauma, because if you understand what is happening to your body, not only is it validating, but then you can start taking steps to retrain it, to change it.
So do you think that most people who pick up this book will be survivors of gun violence?
I do. I initially really do. I think it will catch their eye because, as I've said, there really isn't anything like it out there on the market, which is astonishing to me.
We're waiting for you, girl.
Well, I hope that it's helpful. I will tell you that.
Yeah.
I've been very mindful, Matthew, in how I have written it, because I have worked in trauma for so long, and because I am a trauma survivor myself. As I just said, trauma changes the brain. So I did not write this book with a bunch of psychological babble in it, with a bunch of jargon, with a bunch of 10-syllable words. That's not what this is about. It's about human to human. It's about heart to heart. It's about talking to you, sitting with you in a manner that you're going to easily be able to comprehend and understand, so that you can create some real healing and change in your life.
I'm looking forward to seeing what it does. I mean, how could it not help the conversation, in some way, shape, or form? I mean, to know Jill is to know that, I think you're like a lot of people in America. You're somewhere in the middle, and you have you have an ability to see it on both ways and both
Yep.
sides, and you have
Absolutely.
this really common sense approach about you to these types of things, and you understand the shit that people are going to be bringing to the table who are going to be reading this, both good and bad. And I would have to believe that for so many people that have experienced something like this, and this is just me knowing Jill, guys, right? But once you read this book, I really believe that you will feel better about yourself and your situation. I think she has the ability to help you get to that place. You have a way to use your words and what's up in that beautiful brain of yours to help people find peace. And if you were to say, after people read this book, I hope that they will, and then fill in the blank, have you given any thought to what you hope it'll make them feel?
I want them to feel like they can live into their next chapter of life with joy and freedom, and releasing the chains and releasing fear, and being able to just appreciate life for what it is, not fear what it could be, because that's no place to live. And I truly, truly believe that is possible.
Bulletproof is out right now. I encourage anybody and everybody to pick this book up, especially mental health professionals who are going to be dealing and sitting down with these folks potentially one day. This would be, in my opinion, an incredible how-to guide on how to manage those situations. Jill, I'm so proud of you. Congratulations on the book, and I hope it just crushes out there.
Thank you, my friend. Your friendship is invaluable to me. So I appreciate your cheerleading. I hope people appreciate the book, and I'm ready to hear from people after they read it.